I am talking today about the ELO-SPHERES contribution to the Clarity Challenge. It is a linear MVDR based system, and for those of you who have your results screenshotted, we are system 13, so you can see how we did. Our contribution comes from a team which is a joint partnership between UCL and Imperial, whose people you can see here. And we're working on a project called Environment and Listener Optimized Speech Processing for Hearing Enhancement in Real Situations. And within the scope of the project, we do plan to implement some machine learning approaches. But for now, we are focusing on dynamic listening conditions, which wasn't part of the current challenge. And so for this challenge, we have gone for a relatively simple beamforming based solution. Really just to see what to set what we hope to be a high benchmark for further things to follow. Today I'll be talking about the system in general. I'll talk in some detail about various aspects of the system, and then hopefully there'll be time for a quick demo and you can see our particular results. So this is our overall system. I'll spend a bit of time at a high level talking about this, just so you all get kind of a general idea of what's happening. So we have 6 microphone signals which come into the system. They go through a binaural MVDR beamformer. To answer the particular question we had just in the end of the last session, we steer the beam such that the target source has the binaural cues preserved, but we do not make any attempt at all to preserve the binaural cues of the interferer. So the sound field does collapse. That was based on the belief that it gives you the best overall improvement in signal to noise ratio, and it means, well, it avoids having to estimate the interferer direction. We have a fixed hearing loss compensation component, and then we have an overall attenuator to try and maintain a reasonably constant signal level. So those 2 blocks do audibility improvement, and that block does intelligibility improvement. So the things we need to estimate in our system are the overall level of the signal, which we do every 0.1 second. And basically, if it gets too loud, we turn it down. Just this is to allow sufficient headroom for the hearing loss compensation to work. We need a covariance matrix estimator to design the binaural MVDR beamformer, which we estimate the noise covariance every 0.5 seconds during the noise only component of the signal. And then we have to estimate the direction of arrival, or the steering vector associated with the target, which we start doing at 0.1 seconds after the target starts. And then we keep adapting it for half a second, and then we fix it so that there's no further modulations. Yeah, so we get five estimates which may or may not converge to the right answer. So that's the overall system. So I'll talk a little bit about each of the sections now. So the hearing loss compensation. This is a kind of hopefully a familiar sort of plot to most of you. We have quite a large dynamic range for normal hearing listeners between what we can detect and what causes discomfort. And for hearing impaired people, the detection threshold is increased, but the discomfort threshold doesn't move. And so we have to fit a wide range of audio signals into a small range of possible listening levels. The baseline system used multi-band dynamic range compression, where at each frequency, the gain is level dependent. We were concerned that this time varying gain could affect the MB stoichiometric by introducing correlations which weren't in the signal itself. And also the fact that each band operates independently means that the spectral balance is going to be changing with time, which we were unsure whether that would be overall helpful or not. And from the tutorials yesterday, it sounded like the jury's out. So in any case, we were thinking, well, how can we avoid modulating the target? And that's lots of text there, but basically what we did was we had a level detector on the input and we try to turn things down so that the signal peaks at a maximum of 65 dB SPL. We have a fast attack so that any peaks get quickly reduced, and an infinite release. So once we turn the gain down, we don't turn it back up again, which seemed to be the most kind of benign thing that we could do. We mute the output for the first 0.2 seconds so that while things are stabilizing, we don't have kind of loud transients, and then fade in over half a second. The question of latency and processing in the STFT domain, as we do, I'm going to skip over. I think I'm going to run out of time if I talk too much to this. But the main thing to say is that we chose, well, basically in our initial tests, the longer you make the window, the better the results you get. So in order to keep the longest possible window, we don't do any zero padding of our STFT, which if that means something to you, then great. If not, then don't worry, we can skip it. So you can look at these later if you like. So MVDR beamforming is something that I want to talk to in a bit of detail, in the sense that it was seen in the results just now that this was something that makes a big difference. The different systems that you'll hear in this session take slightly different approaches to the beamforming. So I want to take a little bit of time to talk about beamforming in general, and then other presenters can sort of take this as maybe a starting point and then say how their systems differ from this. So the general concept of beamforming is to use the spatial properties of sound to select the particular sound that we want to listen to. So people will often talk about directional microphones, which can come in different flavors, but generally the aim is to pass the sounds that are coming from more or less the front whilst attenuating those from the back, which is typified by a cardioid response. Other responses are available, but this kind of assumes that the target sound is to the front. And in some situations, we might have the sound coming somewhat to the side. So the first thing that we want to be able to do in a beamformer is to steer the main lobe towards the target source. We also have the situation where our interferer is maybe somewhere within the lobe that isn't being attenuated that much, and we would like to change our directivity pattern so that we do attenuate the undesired sources. In an ideal world, we would have something like that, which picks out just the target, although we've also just talked about the potential problems with what happens if you completely exclude background noise. If we take a kind of approach where a more realistic approach of steering a null towards our interfering source, then what that tends to mean is that we then have increased sensitivity in other directions. With reverberation present in all scenarios, having this increased sensitivity in other directions means that actually overall, we probably aren't doing the best that we can do. And so the question really is, how can we adapt the beam pattern to best match the scene? And the MVDR beamformer is at least one approach, or one definition of optimality. There's two essential parts to minimum variance distortionless response. The first is that we want to minimize the power at the output of the beamformer, but whilst also making sure that the target signal, that which we want to listen to, is passed unaffected. So we're going to do a little bit of maths now. If it's not your thing, don't worry, we'll skip over it quick. We'll do it pretty quickly, but I wanted to just highlight explain what the essential components of how we design this MVDR beamformer are. So starting with a signal model, the signal at one of our microphones, denoted M, is given by this sum, where we have some noise and we have a desired signal, which is X of M, which is given by the target signal, which we want, which is ST, convolved, I should say, with the impulse response of a source from that direction, which is that one there. We're working in the frequency domain, and so we do a Fourier transform, which gives us this expression here, where now we have a multiplication rather than a convolution, where the bit that we really care about here is the relative gain in phase given by D, which can also be called the relative transfer function or the steering vector, when we put it into a vector, because we have M signals. So thinking about vectors, I'm going to use this kind of these little blocks, which just give you an idea of the shape of what's happening, which can make some of this maths a bit easier to follow. So the bit about minimizing the power, we can say that our beamformer output Z is the beamformer weight W, where each weight is for one microphone channel is multiplied by the signal from that channel. Then we add them all up. So it's a vector multiplication. The instantaneous output power is just the squared sum of that. And then the expected, the average output power is what happens if you take the mean of this over time. And the important thing here is that square bit in the middle, which is the spatial covariance matrix. This really describes the sound field, or is the beamformer's description of the sound field, where the diagonal elements are the signal power in each microphone, and the off diagonals are the covariances or the spatial relationships between the signals arriving in each direction. And the beamformer is going to exploit these spatial correlations to try and attenuate the background noise. The distortionless response part of it we get from here, which is our microphone signals. When we apply the beamformer like that, then if we expand out the target and noise components, then the important bit here is the contribution of the desired source to our beamformer output, which we need to constrain to be 1 in order to make sure we have a distortionless response. Doing some nice maths, we can solve this optimization problem, and the result is this, to give us our beamformer weights, where Ry and D are the things that we need to estimate, which I talked about in the very first system overview, where the steering vector and a covariance matrix. So when I estimate those covariance matrices, where this signal covariance matrix can be divided into 2 parts, where the RV bit is the noise covariance matrix, and this bit here depends on the steering vector. So the noise covariance matrix itself is this RV term. And we estimate our covariance matrices by averaging just as an ensemble average over a particular period of time. So we have to choose the direction of the target, and that's the next bit I'm going to talk about. So each scene is generated using the HRTFs or HRIRs, the impulse responses, for one of 19 individuals or heads from a database. And the target is known to arrive within the range of plus or minus 30 degrees in increments. So there's 9 possible directions of arrival. So what our approach to direction of arrival estimation is literally to, of the 171 possible steering vectors, find the one which minimizes this expression. So on the left, we have Ry, which is our estimated signal covariance. We know the Rv, which is the noise covariance, up until the start of the onset of the target. And then this bit in the middle is this bit that's related to the steering vector that we want to find. And then having found the steering vector which best matches the data, at each frequency, we then use a slightly heuristic method to choose which individual and direction of arrival is the best one to choose. I think I might just about have time to play my demo. So if I switch, I need to try and turn off my microphone. And actually, you know what, I've not got quite the time just now. We can come back to this if we have time, but it's a bit of a fiddle to get this right. So
yeah, you have to remember to share the sound at the beginning. Is that?
Oh, I didn't do that. Tell you what, let's skip it just now, and then in the questions we can come back and do some listening. But otherwise, you can see there is the link to an online demo, which you can access yourself.
That's great. Thank you.
So our results look like this. So on the MVDR evaluation, the baseline system was getting roughly 0.31, and our system got 0.66 or 0.67, depending on how you measure it. In the listening tests, we got, for a noise interferer, we got 76.5% correctness, and in the speech and speech, we got 80.3%, which we were quite chuffed with when we saw the results, and even more pleased. I think we came second overall in that particular aspect. And if you look at the breakdown that we were given by participant, we can see that for all but one participant, we make a good improvement. There's something funny going on with P227. So I think the organizers are going to have a little look and see what was going on there. So I think the discussion later about the future challenges. We would particularly like to recommend that we do need to have like some babble noise and sensor noise, which were things which were understandably missing from this first round. We'd love to see dynamic scenes with moving sources and moving listeners. And I would urge the organizers to consider including head tracking data to go along with the moving listeners. With the onset of virtual reality and gyroscopes and phones, I see listening devices having these built in the future. And I think it gives a lot more scope for doing interesting things. But to conclude, our system has been presented and it gave a good increase in MB STOI and also did well in listening tests. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, so we're going to move swiftly on because we're a couple of minutes over. The second talk is going to be from the University of Brno, or Technical University of Brno, and will be presented by Katerina Smolikova. Have I pronounced that reasonably well?
Yes, that was quite good.
Okay, with no further ado.
Okay, can you see my screen now?
Yes.
Okay, perfect.